Hi there and welcome to Penguin Learning. In this National 4 Maths lesson, we will be looking at inequalities. By the end of this lesson, you will know the difference between an inequality versus an equation. You will be familiar with the 4 main types of inequalities. You will know the process of how to solve an inequality. And finally, we're going to go over a lot of examples so that we can know how to use problem solving when it's in a test or maybe in real world examples using inequalities. So, let's get started.
Ooh la la!
So by now, we should know and be familiar with what an equation is. If you're still a bit unsure on equations, you can check out some of our previous videos on the channel. But what we've said in the past to describe an equation is saying that one expression is equal to another. And the key thing to notice here is the equal sign, and that's how we get the name equations, because we're saying one thing is equal to another. But sometimes when we go to solve problems in maths, we don't always want to say that something's equal. Sometimes we might want to say one thing is bigger than the other, or sometimes we might want to say that one thing is less than the other. And what we call when we have something that's greater than or less than is inequalities rather than equations. And sometimes they're also known as inequations. And when we look at inequalities, there are 4 main types that we need to be familiar with. And these are: something's greater than the other, something's less than the other, something's greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. And just like the equal sign had a symbol like this in the equation, each of these inequalities also have their own symbols to represent them. So the greater than sign is an arrow which points to the right, and the less than sign is an arrow which points to the left. And the greater than or equal to sign is also an arrow which points to the right, but we also put a little line under it as well, just to symbolise that it's in fact greater than or equal to something else. And then finally we have less than or equal to, which again is an arrow which points to the left, and we have a little line under it as well, just to show that it's less than or equal to. So a little way to remember which way is pointing which. If you think about it, the greater than sign is pointing forward in a sentence which you read from left to right. So if it's pointing forward, we can think of that being greater than. And the less than sign points the other way of your right sentences, so it's going back the way, so we can say it's less than. So let's have a look at some basic inequalities so we can get our head around how these work. So here's just a basic statement where we are saying that one number is bigger than the other. And in this case, we are saying that the number 2 is greater than the number 1, which is just a fact because we all know that 2 is a bigger number than 1. And this is an example of how we can use an inequality to describe 2 numbers. And we can also say that one number is smaller than the other number. So in this example here, we have said that 5 is less than 55. And again, the greater than sign points to the right, and the less than sign points to the left. So if you think about it, the sign is always pointing towards the smallest number. So we can see here the sign is pointing towards the 1, and it's also pointing towards the 5 here. So in both cases they're pointing towards the smallest number. And we can also reverse each of these statements around. So here, instead of saying 2 is greater than 1, we can also say that 1 is less than 2. Or we can say that 55 is greater than 5 instead of 5 is less than 55. And again, you can see here as well that the arrow is pointing towards the smallest number or pointing away from the biggest number. So let's have a look at a real world example where we can maybe apply an inequality. Imagine a car is driving on a motorway, and we know that the speed limit on the motorway for a car is 70 miles per hour. Well, what we can say then is, if we call the speed of the car S, we can say that the speed should be less than or equal to 70 miles per hour, because it's okay if it's less than 70 miles per hour, but it's also okay if it is 70 miles an hour. So it can't be above this, but it can also be below. So we can say that the speed is less than or equal to 70 miles an hour, or it should be less than or equal to 70 miles an hour. A chef might say that if we cook the steak for too short of a time, then it might be raw and we can't eat it. But they also might say if we cook it for too long of a time, the steak could end up burnt. If we call the total time that we're going to cook the steak, if we call that T, we could say that the time to cook the steak should be greater than or equal to 3 minutes, and that would mean that the steak's not going to be too raw, But we could also say that t should be less than or equal to 10 minutes, and that means that the steak wouldn't get burnt. So we saw here we've combined two inequalities to solve a problem or set a time range for an example, a chef wanting to cook a steak. So just like equations, sometimes we're asked to solve inequalities for a certain variable. So have a look at this one here, this inequality. We've been told that 2x is greater than 6. And just like when we solve an equation, our goal of solving an inequality is to have the variable by itself on one side, so that we have x by itself and an expression for x on the other side saying that it's greater than whatever this is. So to have x by itself and solve for it, what we have to do is take this 2 over to the other side, and because it's 2 times x on this side, when we take the 2 over, it's going to be divided by on this side here, so that will look something like this. We can say that x is greater than 6 divided by 2, because what we've done, we've moved the 2 over here and brought it over so that it's now divided by the 6. And then all we have to do now is solve for 6 divided by 2, which we can say is 3. So the process of solving an inequality is the exact same as that as an equation, but the only difference is when we have the answer here, the final answer, we are not saying x is equal to a certain number. We are saying that x is greater than 3, so that means x could be any number that's greater than 3. So x could be 4, 5, 10, 100, 1 million. We don't know, but the important thing is that x is greater than 3, and therefore it can be a whole range of different numbers. So what about this inequality now if we wanted to solve for x? We are told that x plus 6 is less than 16. So what we can do then is, we can take this plus 6 over to the other side to make it become minus 6, and that will give us an expression for x. So we have x is less than 16 minus 6, or we can say that x is less than 10. So this next one is asking us to solve the inequality for 6 minus x is less than 9. So again, we have to rearrange this inequality so we have x by itself on the left hand side and then some number on the right hand side. So we can begin by moving this plus 6 or the positive 6 over to the right hand side and making it become minus 6. So we can say that minus x is less than 9 minus 6. So all we've done there is move this plus 6 over to the other side and it's became minus 6. And because minus x is less than 9 minus 6, we can just say that minus x is less than 3. But remember, what we have to do is just have x by itself and not minus x. So we have to get rid of this minus symbol and bring that over to the other side. But one other thing with inequalities, if we have a minus sign and we want to bring it over to the other side, what we also have to do is change the direction of the inequality. So that means that if we want to have x instead of minus x, we can change the sign, but we also have to change the sign of the inequality as well. So the sign from positive to negative or negative to positive, but also the direction of the inequality. So that would mean that we could say that x is greater than minus 3, and that's how we solve the inequality. If we have the minus sign here next to the x, we flip the sign round here for the inequality and we can move this sign over to the other side. So this answer means that x can be any number that's bigger than minus 3. So that means x can be minus 2, minus 1, even 0, and any positive number x can be classed as because it's greater than minus 3. So this next equality, we've been told that 6 is greater than 14 minus x. But one thing that I always like to do when solving inequalities or equations for that matter, I like to bring the x's all over to the other side. So what I'm going to do is try and reverse this. So I've been told that if 6 is greater than 14 minus x, that would just mean that 14 minus x is less than 6. So it can be rewritten as this. So now we have 14 minus x is less than 6. So again, we want to have x by itself on the left hand side, so that will involve bringing this plus 14 over to the other side and becoming minus 14. So that would become minus x is less than 6 minus 14, and 6 minus 14 is going to be a negative number, which is going to give us minus 8. So if minus x is less than minus 8, we can get rid of the two negative signs on either side. And then because we're dealing with the negative signs, or we're multiplying by minus 1, again we have to change the direction of this sign as well. so less than is going to become greater than. And that means we can say that x is any number that's greater than 8. And if you want to check if your answer is correct, what we can do is put this back in our original inequality and think to ourselves, if x is any number that's greater than 8, so let's just say 10 for example, if x is 10, that means that we'll have here 14 minus 10, which would be 4, and that would mean that 6 is greater than 4, so our expression is correct. So if it's any number greater than 8, that means here we have 14 minus 8, which is 6, and we know that 6 has to be greater than whatever's on this side, so that means that what we have here in our final answer is correct and makes sense. So once again, if we want to get rid of negative signs, or in other words, when we want to multiply by minus 1, we have to change the sign or reverse the symbol to solve for the inequality. So we're going to do one more example, and this time we're going to solve the inequality for 6p minus 8 is greater than or equal to p plus 7. And notice that this time our variable isn't x, but it's in fact p. And this changes nothing about the problem solving that we have to do. The only difference is instead of writing x, this time we write p. And this could be any variable, for example, it could be any letter that it's symbolised by, but it doesn't change anything, only for the fact that this time we're writing p and not x. So the goal is we want to have p on the left hand side by itself and say that it's less than or equal to something else on this side. So what I'm going to do is keep all of the p's to the left hand side, so that one there, the 6p, is already there, but I'm going to bring this p over to the other side, and then I'm going to move this minus 8 over as well. So if we move this p over to the other side, because it's plus or positive on this side, then it's going to become negative or minus when we move it over. So here we have our minus p, so we have 6p minus p on the left hand side, and that is greater than or equal to 7. We already have the 7 on the right hand side, so that stays where it is. And we also want to bring this minus 8 over to the other side, so when we do that, it then becomes plus 8. So there we have 7 plus 8 on the right hand side. So then if we have on the left hand side 6p minus one other p, 6 minus 1 is going to just be 5p, and that's going to be greater than or equal to 7 plus 8, which is just 15. And now if 5p is greater than or less than 15, what we want to do is have p by itself, and that means bringing this 5 over to the other side. And because it's 5 times p, the 5 is going to be divided by on this other side. So that would mean then that p is greater than or equal to 15 divided by 5. And then if we do 15 divided by 5, we know that is equal to 3. So let's summarise this National 4 lesson on inequalities. So we've said that an inequality is a way of saying that one thing is either greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to one other thing. So they're different from equations in the fact that you're not equating or saying one thing is equal. They are different by these 4 different ways. And unlike an equation where we solve and we have the variable equaling one number, when we solve an inequality, it can be a whole range of numbers. So saying that, for example, x is greater than 4 means that x can be any number at all which is bigger than 4, but it can't be 4 itself. So 5 or anything bigger than 5 the number can be. But if we say that x is greater than or equal to 4, that means x could be 4, but also any number bigger. So if we say x is greater than 4, it means it can't be 4, but x is greater than or equal to 4 means it could be 4, but also any number that's bigger than 4. And also we know that when we go to solve an inequality, we can solve it the same way as we would equations, except when we multiply or divide by minus 1 in order to solve for the variable. And what's different is that we reverse the symbol. So for example, if we have minus x is less than 2, what we can do is multiply both sides by minus 1 to get us x and minus 2 like this. But when we're dealing with inequalities, we have to reverse this symbol as we're shown here. And this little difference here is the only difference between solving an equation and solving an inequality. So just watch out when we have minus signs next to the x and we want to multiply both sides by minus 1. So I hope this National 4 Maths lesson on inequalities has been helpful to you, and if that's the case, be sure to give the video a like. And as always, if you have any questions on this video, just drop a comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And if you'd like to see more content like this, be sure and subscribe to the channel or head over to our website at penguin-learning.com. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.